NASCAR handed fans two completely different emotional experiences within the same weekend at Phoenix Raceway, and both of them had the name Bubba Wallace and 2311 Racing written all over them. On one side, there was a penalty so razor-thin that fans across the country are still debating whether it should have even been called, and on the other side, one of NASCAR's most talked-about drivers may not even be behind the wheel at the next race, with his team already holding not one, not two, but three separate contingency plans ready to execute at a moment's notice. These two stories, separated by days but connected by the same driver and the same organization, paint a picture of what NASCAR in 2026 actually looks like, a sport where fractions of a mile per hour can change the outcome of a race, and where real life doesn't pause just because the green flag drops. Phoenix Raceway delivered a Cup Series race that was as competitive as advertised. The field was tight throughout the afternoon, drivers were pushing hard on every restart, and the margins between a strong finish and a frustrating result came down to execution rather than raw speed. Pit road, more than anything else, became the defining factor of the entire event, not just for one driver, but for several of the biggest names in the sport. Teams were threading an incredibly fine needle all afternoon, and even the most experienced crews and the most skilled drivers were finding themselves caught on the wrong side of the rulebook. When the checkered flag finally flew, it was Blaney and Team Penske who came out on top, navigating the chaos better than anyone else in the field and claiming the victory. But winning wasn't the biggest conversation coming out of Phoenix. The penalties were. Bubba Wallace and the number 2311 Racing Toyota were genuinely fast all afternoon at Phoenix. Wallace was having a strong, competitive race day, the kind of performance that reminds the sport exactly why 2311 Racing has become one of the most watched organizations in the paddock. He crossed the finish line in 6th place, which is a solid result by any measure in today's Cup Series field. But his final position could have been even stronger, and that is where the story takes a painful turn. Wallace was flagged for speeding on pit road by just 0.08 miles per hour over the limit. That number deserves to be read slowly, 0.08 miles per hour. That is a margin that exists within a single heartbeat, within the slightest twitch of pressure on the throttle, within the kind of fraction that no human instinct can reliably control at racing speed. NASCAR's rules, however, have no gray area. Over the limit is over the limit, and Wallace was sent to the back of the field, damaging his track position and ultimately costing him what could have been an even better finishing result. If you're sitting in that number 23 Toyota and you know you just lost meaningful position because of 0.08 miles per hour, that is one of the most gut-wrenching feelings a driver can experience on what was otherwise a strong race day. This is the precision that NASCAR demands. There is no mercy for fractions. Wallace wasn't the only driver caught in pit road trouble at Phoenix that afternoon, and that context matters enormously when understanding just how difficult speed management was on that particular day. Kyle Busch, a two-time Cup Series champion, was also penalized for pit road speeding at Phoenix. When a driver with Busch's experience and championship pedigree gets caught in the same trap, it tells you something real about the conditions teams were dealing with. Kyle Larson, widely regarded as one of the most naturally gifted drivers in the sport and a legitimate championship contender, was also hit with a speeding penalty on pit road. Even elite-level execution wasn't enough to avoid the penalty box on this particular afternoon. The pattern across multiple top-tier drivers confirms that Phoenix Raceway's pit road speed management was genuinely brutal, and teams across the entire field were struggling to navigate it cleanly. But even with all of those penalties stacking up throughout the race, the single most visually unforgettable moment of the entire afternoon at Phoenix belonged to someone else entirely. Ty Dillon and the number 10 car departed pit road during a stop with the fuel can still physically connected to the vehicle. Dillon then proceeded to drive an entire lap around the 1-mile Phoenix Oval with that fuel can dangling from the car. Fans watching at home reacted immediately, and the television coverage made the moment impossible to miss. The official penalty listed was removing equipment from the designated pit area. Nothing catastrophic happened, and that is the important fact here, but at racing speed, a loose fuel can attach to a moving vehicle is a serious safety situation, and the sport got fortunate that the outcome was a penalty rather than a dangerous incident. This was the kind of visual that NASCAR fans will be discussing for a long time. When the final results from Phoenix were processed, Blaney and Team Penske had earned their moment. Blaney managed to stay clean, avoid the penalties that damaged so many other competitors, and execute at the critical moments when the race was on the line. The victory was a significant one. Team Penske needed a strong showing and delivered it under genuinely chaotic circumstances. When fans look back at the 2026 Phoenix race, the 0.08 mph penalty on Bubba Wallace will remain one of the defining talking points of the afternoon, a tiny number with major consequences. But as significant as all of that was, the second story coming out of the 23XI racing camp this week carries even more weight, and it has nothing to do with racing at all. Bubba Wallace and his wife Amanda are expecting their second child, and the due date falls right around the time of the NASCAR Cup Series race at Darlington Raceway on March 22. Earlier this season, Wallace addressed this situation directly and on the record, leaving no ambiguity about where he stands. When his first son Brexton was born, Wallace was away at the track fulfilling his racing obligations and missed the birth entirely. He has stated clearly that he will not let that happen again, that he will be present for the birth of his second child, regardless of what is on the race schedule. That is a decision that every person watching can understand and respect, whether they follow NASCAR for the competition or for the human stories that run alongside it. However, from a team operations standpoint, this creates a real and complicated challenge, because pregnancies do not follow race schedules, and Darlington is coming up fast. Wallace's spotter Freddie Kraft discussed the situation openly on the Door Bumper Clear podcast and confirmed that 23XI Racing has 3 separate contingency plans in place, depending entirely on how events unfold in the days leading up to Darlington. Plan A is built around Cory Heim stepping into the number 23 Toyota as the primary replacement driver. If the team has at least a day or more of advance notice, meaning they know with enough lead time that Wallace will not be at the track, then Heim is the man they turn to. However, there is a notable and specific complication attached to this plan. Heim and Wallace do not share the same cockpit configuration. The seat, the pedal placement, and the adjustments required are different enough that the team would need a full day of preparation to properly modify the car for Heim to drive it safely and competitively. If time allows, Heim is the answer. Plan B accounts for the scenario that every team managing this situation fears most, Amanda going into labor just hours before the race. The kind of sudden, unplanned timing that is entirely possible and entirely out of anyone's control. In that case, 23XI Racing simply will not have the time required to reconfigure the car for Heim, and the team would turn to a different driver who can fit into the car as it currently sits and get behind the wheel without significant adjustments or preparation time. The specific name tied to this backup was not publicly disclosed in detail, but the plan itself is confirmed and ready. Plan C exists as a third layer of preparation. The full specifics were not disclosed publicly, but the fact that a third contingency plan exists tells you exactly how seriously 23XI Racing is approaching this situation. They are not leaving anything to chance, and they are not operating on hope. This is a team in the middle of a competitive Cup Series season managing a genuinely unpredictable human situation, and the level of organizational preparation they have demonstrated is a direct reflection of how professionally the organization is being run. The question that NASCAR fans started asking the moment this story broke is the obvious one: what happens to Bubba Wallace's championship eligibility if he misses Darlington? Under standard NASCAR Cup Series regulations, drivers are required to compete in every race in order to remain eligible for the championship and the playoffs. Missing a race under normal circumstances is not something the sport allows without consequence. However, NASCAR does maintain a waiver system that allows for exceptions under specific qualifying circumstances, and the birth of a child is explicitly one of those situations. The most directly relevant precedent here involves Denny Hamlin, who sat out the NASCAR Cup Series race in Mexico City in 2025. NASCAR granted Hamlin a waiver, keeping him fully eligible for the championship despite missing the race. That decision established a clear and recent example of how the sanctioning body handles these situations when the circumstances are legitimate and genuinely outside a driver's control. Given that precedent, it is highly probable that Bubba Wallace would receive the same waiver if he misses Darlington for the birth of his child. NASCAR has demonstrated a willingness to apply this waiver policy in situations that are truly beyond a driver's ability to predict or prevent. A new baby qualifies without question. The competitive stakes are real, Wallace is racing in a season that matters, and missing Darlington without a waiver still represents a disruption to race preparation and team momentum. But the framework exists to protect his eligibility, and the sport appears ready to use it. 1 driver. 2 stories. 1 week. A 0.08 mph infraction that cost meaningful track position at Phoenix, and a decision to step away from the car at Darlington so he can be present when his second child comes into the world. 23XI Racing has 3 plans ready. NASCAR has a waiver system that applies. And Bubba Wallace has made his position clear: family comes first, and the racing will still be there when he returns. Now we want to hear from you directly. Was the pit road penalty on Bubba Wallace at Phoenix the right call, or is 0.08 mph too small a margin to be enforcing at that level of competition? And if Wallace does miss Darlington, do you believe Cory Heim is the right driver to step into the number 23 Toyota? Drop your answers in the comments below. This community gives real takes, and every perspective matters here. If this is the kind of direct, fact-based NASCAR coverage you want every single week, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to Daily NASCAR. We are a brand new channel pushing toward 1,000 subscribers, and the mission is straightforward: a place where real NASCAR fans talk about this sport honestly and thoroughly, every single week, the way it deserves to be covered. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.